All right, we're going to talk about value shading with a light source for your observational drawing, where we take our object, we've drawn it multiple times on our page. This is our example, and then we're going to draw, or shade rather, use value shading for the objects. So you have to think about your light source in all of these boxes. I'm just going to show you a little example here with pencil. You'll be doing 2 color pencil sections and a section with ink as well. So I made myself this little light bulb as a guide, and you can decide where you want your light source to be, but wherever it is you need to pay attention to so that you can accurately place your darkest values and your cast or drop shadows. So I have placed my light source here coming from the top, kind of at an angle, going this way, okay, from the top left of my paper down to the right corner. So I've looked at these scissors as a guide, as an example of kind of how I want to look to pay attention to my darker values, my shadows where they are, my highlights and my cast shadows, and my mid-tone values. So here I've gone and looked at the actual coloring of the scissors. If I were to put this in black and white, it would be pretty similar because these are already gray. But like, let's say you had a pair of red scissors or something, you're going to want to take a picture and put that in black and white for yourself. It's just going to make it easier on you to see where your values are. Okay, so I'm looking at where the cast shadows are. Let's talk about that specifically. If I were to place these scissors here next to my drawing of them, there is a little bit of a gap in the top, so I'm just going to open the scissors to focus on the top here. I can see that there is a cast shadow underneath and a cast shadow in here. If I had a light source coming directly from where my little drawing is, I can use my flashlight as an example, you can see that the shadow obviously gets way more intense. So you need to think about your light source as being like a bright light shining from that angle on your object. And you can see right here where the shadows come out a lot farther away from the object. So when I was looking at it before, I was looking at it without any extra light, and that means my shadow is not really popping too much. So you want to kind of get more of an extreme going on. It's a good idea to use a light as a reference, since especially here in the classroom you have artificial lighting. It's all above you, so it's not going to be really dramatic. So you may want to use your flashlight and share with your friends, take a photo of what the object looks like, or use the photo references that we've provided for you. Okay, so I'm looking here and I have some cast shadows or drop shadows, and it's called a cast shadow because that's the shadow that the object is casting onto the surface. So this shadow comes out quite a ways from the scissor handle. I have it started over here. And if you notice up underneath here, it's maybe difficult to see on the camera, but the shadow is a lot darker right under the object, and it fades away the farther away you get from it. So you want to make sure that when you're shading, you're starting out with a darker value right next to that object, and as it comes out away from the object, it's getting a little bit lighter because it's becoming more saturated with the light that's actually in the room. Okay. So you want to just fade that out gently as you go from the object itself. Try to make sure your shadows are an even value. And if you make a mistake, it's just pencil, so you can use an eraser to soften some of that line work out. I have a paper stump. You're more than welcome to use. If you're at home, you could use a Q-tip, you could use a piece of tissue or paper towel. If you want to add a little bit of extra blending, it's not really necessary to use this, but it's an option. You can get good enough blending just with your pencil and paper if you're working on your control of pressure. Okay, but already that looks a lot more realistic because now we've got the shadow here in our drawing. Okay, just like we can see it here with the light. Now this one inside the hand, the thumb loop, again is much darker here, and it kind of fades out. So I'm going to take my value and just gradate it from dark to light, and I'm following the contour of the object. Okay, the cross contour, the contour means I'm looking at the shape of that shadow, the shape of the object. It's round, so my line work and my shading is also curving. It's also round. All right, if you just shade it up and down, it will look flat. It won't look realistic and three-dimensional, and that's really what we're going for. Okay. So I've got another shadow here. This object, the scissor, is on top of this one. So I can go ahead and start with the top object and work my way to the back because this shadow is going to be casted onto this scissor. I can take it all the way through. I'm kind of following the shape of the scissor, the contour. And remember, you want to stay inside your box, so don't go any farther than your quadrant lines, your boundaries there. But follow the shape of the scissor and then go in and add your cast shadow. I've already shaded the top of my scissors here, so you can see where the values are a little bit darker versus lighter to start to get that illusion of three-dimensional space. Also, this part of the scissor slants down, I think, slants downward. It's a little bit different than this one, but I think it's this edge right here. So that is a darker value. I'm going to go ahead and shade that in. And then I'm going to do my shadow, again starting a little bit darker up next to the object. And then slowly fading out away from the object. Okay, there is a pretty distinct line here when we look at the shadow, so you don't want to fuzz it out too much. You do want to keep the shape that the scissor is casting of itself. Okay, and then just push your values a little bit darker right up against the scissor. I'm using kind of a back and forth circular motion. And then just fade that out, okay? So we have to consider that we have a scissor underneath. I don't want to do this whole entire thing for you because I want to see what you're capable of doing yourself. I didn't bring this whole shadow in over like I was supposed to, so I need to go in and kind of add that in. I just added like a little bit of a guideline there for myself. Okay, so we've got one scissor on top of another, so obviously the shadow has to be casted on top of that other scissor. So when we get ready to do this one, we'll still shade this whole entire area. It's going to probably be darker because we've got a shadow casted on top. So whatever the pressure you're using with your pencil, it needs to stay consistent throughout this whole space. But we already have an extra layer of graphite here, and that is going to stay there and make it look darker here so that the actual shadow, you know, looks like it's being casted for real. So if I'm going to shade this in, the blade of the scissor, I think that's the blade, yeah, this is the handle. So this is the blade of the scissor. It's a little bit darker on mine, might be a lighter silver on yours. I'm going to go in and shade in the direction of the object because it's crossing this way and it's underneath another object. It's going to be a little darker. I'm going to go in and shade that in. And that is probably going to be like a level 4 or 5 maybe. If we're using a 5-point value scale, that would be black. But if we're using maybe a 7 or 8 value scale, it's going to be a dark gray. So if you're just focused on a 5-point value, it's probably going to be a level 3 or 4 value. Okay, and if the shadow disappears, you can just go back in the direction of the shadow, just strengthen it a little bit so you get some of that separation. Or you can take your eraser, tap a little bit of the graphite out, in that section if you want it to be lighter, or you can take your blender, kind of smooth it out a little bit more. We want to think about reflections too, because scissors are, at least the blade is made of metal, so it's going to be shiny reflective surface. So you can take your eraser and lighten some areas that the light reflects off of, and then darken up against those areas a little bit more. So it looks like some reflections are being cast. Okay, it's a little bit difficult to see, so I'm going to just lift it up. There we go. So you can see there's a little bit of a highlight reflection in there. The cast shadow goes over the scissor because it's overlapping. Okay, same thing over here. The shadow is going over the scissor because it's overlapping. It's in the foreground, that's in the background. Technically, this is the most foreground area, this part of the handle, and this would be middle ground and background. Okay, and then like really background, the negative space. That's as far as I'm going to go for you, because I want you to do the rest on your own, but you can kind of get an idea of what it's supposed to look like and how you're supposed to use your light source. Keep in mind, wherever you place your light source for this section, you keep it for all the same, in the same place for all the other sections when you get ready to do those.